the Indianapolis Colts come away with a massive 23-20 win over the Las Vegas Raiders this Sunday to bolster their playoff chances and set up a potential Sunday Night Football showdown against the division rival Houston Texans in Week 18. Of course, it was an amazing game and an amazing result. So let's break it down from the Colts perspective. We'll start off with some stats overall from the Colts. Gardner Minshew was 15 for 23 for 224 yards and a touchdown. Jonathan Taylor had 21 carries for 96 yards and a touchdown, and it felt like everyone caught a pass for the Colts today. Alec Pierce, of course, had that one 58-yard receiving touchdown. Josh Downs had 2 receptions for 53 yards, and Pittman led the way in receptions with 5 for 46 yards. Defensively, E.J. Speed had 12 tackles and 8 solo tackles. Juju Brents led the way with 3 pass deflections. DeForest Buckner and Tyquan Lewis each recorded a sack, and 4 Colts, including those 2 I just mentioned, came away with a TFL in this game. It certainly felt like the Colts were selling their win down the river later on in this game, but that wasn't exactly how it went down when you really look into it, because even in the first half, the offensive struggles were, for the most part, covered up by the initial first drive, which was obviously an incredible 5-play touchdown drive, capped off by that rushing touchdown from Jonathan Taylor. And then, of course, you have that 58-yard receiving touchdown from Alec Pierce. And so those 2 sort of drives cover up the offensive struggles from the first half. It certainly felt like they were running out of gas towards the end of the game, but really the efficacy of this offense was consistent throughout and not necessarily in the most effective manner. Of course, the offense could have been better, and I think that the majority of the struggles on offense stem from the trenches, right? That Vegas pass rush was very effective throughout this game, and that, of course, partially falls on the Colts offensive line and the pass blocking side of that offensive line in allowing that pressure to really get to Minshew, because that pressure got to Minshew. He wasn't sacked very many times in this game, but you could tell where he had to scramble a little bit and make a rush decision to throw. That's where those inaccuracies and those issues in the passing game for the Colts really started to bubble to the surface. There's a direct correlation between the pressure on Gardner Minshew and his ability to throw a relaxed, composed, accurate pass. We saw when he had a clear pocket and a calm presence, and his ability, okay, he has the time now to make the right decision and make a strong pass, and he did that the majority of the time when he had that clear pocket. So that didn't happen very often for the Colts, and that's why the majority of their drives sort of sputtered out towards the end and they ended up punting, where you can run it with Jonathan Taylor a certain amount of times. Eventually, you're going to have to throw the ball, and in those situations, maybe it's Max Crosby, it doesn't matter who it is. The Raiders' D-line and that Raiders pass rush was really getting to Gardner Minshew, and it forced him into situations where he couldn't necessarily make a perfect throw for a first down. But when he had that clear pocket and that clear presence, his performance spiked dramatically. And props to the receivers, by the way. Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, everyone really. 8 different receivers had a reception in this game, and that is incredible to see because that allowed Minshew to have options when he's throwing the ball. And those receivers got open and put him in situations where you could turn a near sack into a 16-yard gain. And that was something that I was very impressed with for this Colts team throughout the game. So the pass blocking was a bit of a concern for the Colts in this game on the offensive side of the ball, but the offensive line really made up for it in the run blocking in the ground game, right? Creating space for Jonathan Taylor and Trey Sermon to make plays, and they did make those plays where when we needed it late in the game, whether we were running out the clock or we desperately needed a score or a first down, an 8, 10, 15-yard gain from Jonathan Taylor or Trey Sermon was very beneficial late in this one, and it allowed us to run down that clock way more than we otherwise would have, and that ultimately falls on the offensive line and their run blocking. So they didn't have a terrible game, that position group, but I'm very proud of the run game for the Colts, and even though on paper it may not seem like that was as major of a contribution as the other aspects of this offense, I think it definitely contributed to this win, especially down the stretch when they were running down the clock. And the credit there goes to the offensive line and, of course, Jonathan Taylor and Trey Sermon for making the plays that they needed to make. The defense for the Colts did have its own issues, but before we get into that, I want to applaud the secondary for taking away the deep threat that Aiden O'Connell has had with Davante Adams. Multiple times in this game on 3rd and long or whatever situation it may be, Aiden O'Connell was looking deep for Davante Adams or whoever else, But every single time, 40, 50, 60 yards down the field, his receivers were closely covered by Juju Brents and the rest of this Colts secondary. I was very impressed with the fact that they just completely took away the deep threat, because Davante Adams is one of those speed receivers that you look for in those 30, 40, 50, 60-yard gains, and the Raiders just had none of that in this matchup. It was very, very incredible to see for the Colts, where if you're getting into the playoffs, and I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, we haven't clinched yet, but once you get into the playoffs and you're playing against other teams with, let's say, Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce, someone like that, who are those deep threats that could have those 40, 50, 60-yard gains, taking away that aspect of another team's offense is obviously an incredible contributor to your ability to win a game, and they did it today against the Raiders. It was very good to see. What really killed the Colts in this game, though, was 10 to 15-yard out routes. That was just the aspect of the Raiders offense that absolutely shredded the Colts through the air. Whether it was a dig over the middle or just sideline out routes, it felt like Aiden O'Connell had that pass and had that throw every single time, especially once they figured that out later in the game. On that final drive, it felt like O'Connell had a first down on every single play. And he did have a string of 3 to 4 first downs in a row, 10, 12, 15-yard gains. And it was on the sideline to Davante Adams or to Jacoby Myers or to whoever it may have been, Austin Hooper, where just on that final drive, they had that pass at the first down marker by the sideline so they could get out of bounds. It's just something that I wish the Colts secondary had paid a little bit more close attention to, especially once those plays started working and they just started flying down the field late in that game, and suddenly the pressure of a Raiders comeback became a lot more real. Davante Adams played a major role in that with 13 receptions for 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. Props to those receivers for finding open space, and props to Aiden O'Connell for getting them the ball, but that was a red flag for this Colts defense across the board. I will say, though, this Colts defense really held down the fort when it needed to later on in this game. Of course, when the Raiders were making their final push to come back and win this one, they eventually had that 4-yard touchdown pass to Davante Adams with under a minute left to go. But before then, the reason why there was a minute left to go when that happened was because of that goal line stand from the Colts, where on 1st and goal they stopped him, and then again on 2nd and 3rd and goal, and finally 4th and goal, of course, the Raiders ended up scoring. But the Colts burned a lot of clock with those defensive stops, and they had multiple key stops throughout the game on 3rd down. A little bit of problems on 3rd and long in the first half, but eventually that Colts defense really settled in and made the necessary plays when it needed to, when it counted. That was a great thing to see from this Colts. Just the clutch moments from this Colts defense were very plentiful, and that's something that you love to see as we roll into the postseason. And on a slightly unrelated note, it's really nice to see the Colts kicking game be a lot more reliable. You and I both know that throughout the past few years of Colts football, the kicking game and the special teams has not necessarily been one of its strengths. And it's very nice to see a 46-yard field goal for Matt Gay, and you're not even worried about whether or not it's going to go in. Him being able to consistently knock down those clutch kicks and clutch moments is very refreshing, and a heavy burden lifted off of our shoulders as Colts fans. We love to see it. Nonetheless, I am very happy that the Colts were able to pull out this win. Regardless of any weaknesses or problems we may have faced, seeing the Colts be able to hunker down and hold on to a late lead and not throw the game away like we have in past seasons and even earlier on this year, it's a very nice thing to see and very encouraging as we move forward into our push to the postseason. Next week, we face a win and in potentially a Sunday Night Football scenario against the Houston Texans to put ourselves in the postseason of this 2023 NFL season. I am very excited for this game. I think it should be Sunday Night Football. I think it's the best game on the Week 18 slate. We'll see if the powers that be agree with me on that. But either way, it's time to be on point and ready to run it back as Colts fans. And of course, for the Colts players and coaches, most importantly, this team is ready for the playoffs. It feels like a playoff team. The Raiders were great. They were the hottest team in the entire NFL. They had all the momentum coming off beating the Kansas City Chiefs last week. And we stopped them very early on and snuffed out that momentum very early on. It's a great thing to see. The Colts are ready for the Houston Texans next week. Here on the Colts Perspective, on Saturday, we're going to have a video sort of deep diving a preview of the Houston Texans game, how we can win it, what it means, what the playoff scenarios are, and everything that has to do with the Indianapolis Colts in Week 18 of this NFL season. Thankfully, we pulled out a win this week to set up for a nail-biting finish to this roller coaster of a season. Thank you for watching from the Colts Perspective.